Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are at in the country, and greetings from Michigan. Welcome to our webinar, Using Clues to Get from Objectives to Interactions and Tools. I'm Tom Petro from Innovative Learning Group, and we're really excited to have you on board today. You know, getting from learning and performance support objectives to a really excellent functioning course or tool is not a simple exercise, as I'm sure most of you know who have had to do it. It requires a lot of expertise from different disciplines, things like instructional design for sure, but also interface design, information design, interaction design, programming, and graphics. There's a lot to it. And today, Matt and Lisa are going to demonstrate approaches that ILG takes when developing learning that effectively delivers on the objectives. We've got a few people on board here today who don't know us. There's quite a few who do, but wanted to take a few minutes here just to tell you a little bit about us. In addition to what you see there on the screen, ILG designs and develops custom learning and performance support solutions. And we've been doing this for 13 years. But many of those people on our team have been creating custom learning solutions for a lot longer than that, probably more than they care to admit to. What we really care about and what we think differentiates us is our focus on performance and helping organizations reach their business goals. For us, it's always about performance first. We work with a pretty diverse group of medium and large-sized companies all across the country, some of which we also serve on a global basis. And while we build solutions in all methods of delivery, we've completed over 900 e-learning solutions. When we look at the statistics, in fact, about 75% of the solutions we build are e-learning or mobile learning. So we have considerable expertise to draw from for our talk today. Matt is ILG's lead programmer and learning technology consultant, and he also leads the company's mobile learning strategy. This is a guy that's no stranger to e-learning. He has 20 years experience developing courses and has authored over 500 of them. So he's got a lot of experience. And Matt also consults with our clients on their learning portal and learning management system needs. And today we announced that Matt has just received a 2017 Learning Champion Award from eLearning Magazine. And this award recognizes individuals for exceptional contributions to the learning industry. Matt was awarded for his thought leadership contributions to the industry over the years, which includes several conference presentations that he has made and continues to make. Now, presenting along with Matt, we also have our CEO, Lisa Toenniges. She has more than 25 years of experience in the performance improvement industry, and she's consulted with many Fortune 1000 companies about their learning and performance strategies and solutions. She's a certified performance technologist and is endorsed by the International Society for Performance Improvement, and in 2015, she completed her term as past president of that society. Well, let's get started with a poll that tells us a little bit about you folks. Let's take a few seconds to complete it and submit it, and let's see who we have here on board today. Okay, good. Well, we've got a pretty good mix. Looks like about 43% of you are instructional designers. We've got some directors and managers, some programmers. So I think everybody here will really have some good information and to take away from our talk today. So with that, let's get started, and I'll turn it over to Lisa Toenniges. Lisa?
Well, thanks very much, Tom. And it's terrific to be here, and I think this is really an interesting topic and actually kind of a surprising one to me. I engage with quite a few instructional designers, obviously, and, you know, when I ask them, you know, how do you decide what interaction you can use? I often get kind of a, well, I kind of go with my gut, or, I talk with the SMEs and we decide. So I find that a little surprising. And then, I talk with a lot of training managers, and I'll say, well, how do you select your authoring tools? And I'll get kind of similar responses, like, well, the IT department selects them for us. Well, we had a graphic designer that came from another company, and, we're just using what she selected, that they used at their other company. So I'm hoping today we can, just give you a little bit more rationale for some of these decisions. Okay, so on the screen, we're looking at just a simple scene. You can think about this like a a mystery crime investigation where we're looking for means and motive and opportunity. So we've connected the path here that you see with the rope from objectives to interactions and tools. And obviously based on the title of the session, all we need to do is use these clues to get from one to the next. Seems simple enough? Well, we're going to muddy the water just a little bit as we dig in a little bit deeper to the process and see how it works, right? Because if we're thinking about improving performance, what we're going to do is, obviously we want to look at our learning objectives, but we also want to think about those performance objectives as well. Because if we're trying to improve performance, we really need to have the learners be doing something. I think the next thing we want to address is there's really something missing here in this logic, okay? Because we can't go directly from objectives to interactions and tools. The first thing we're going to need to look at is really what's the solution? Is it going to be classroom? Is it going to be e-learning? Is it going to be virtual instructor-led or something else? Because we want to make sure that we're going to be able to achieve the objectives with the delivery method that we select. All right? So we're going to have to think about that delivery method from objectives. And also because we really can't think about tools and interactions until we know what our delivery method is. Okay, so let's go ahead and connect our rope here from the objectives to the delivery method. And then let's also go ahead and assume that what we're going to talk about here now is some kind of online solution or like an e-learning course. So what we're going to do next then is think about tools. And if we're thinking about e-learning, these are going to be authoring tools, okay? So let's go ahead then and connect our rope here from delivery method to those authoring tools. And let's now rearrange the photo just so we can make room there for our interactions. And it's probably fair to go ahead and just start to number these, right? 1, 2, and 3. And so the next thing we're going to think about are those interactions. And if we're talking about interactions, what we really mean are those practice interactions, right? Because if somebody's going to really be able to do something, we like to often think about a ratio of 25 to 50% practice. So should we go ahead and just put a 4 on there? Well, I don't know that that's really sufficient because there could be times where you really are not going to be able to build the practice interactions that you need to achieve those objectives with those authoring tools. So there might be times where you need to switch them around, Now, it just matters that they all eventually line up, okay? So it doesn't matter if maybe you have to go back and reevaluate your authoring tool to make sure that you choose practice examples that can help you achieve those objectives. Our point in the session isn't really to leave you with a hard mystery to solve at this point, but really to move ahead and give you a simple approach that I think you're going to find is going to work for you most of the time. So I think on the screen now you see such a simple approach where we can start with objectives and move on to delivery method and authoring tool and finally interactions. So what we're going to do the rest of the session here is provide some help and some ideas for each of these steps. And I think, again, if anything in the real world, you may swap kind of selecting the interactions and then the authoring tools. And really what we want to make sure is get that authoring tool that's going to work the best for the scenario you're in. So let me pause here just for a minute and see if any comments or questions in chat.
And we encourage you to chime in with questions at any time during the program.
Okay, so let's get on. Let's assume that we have our objectives, and the first thing we want to do now is move from objectives to our delivery method. In other words, choose the delivery method that best matches the learning and performance objectives. So if we just take a simple case study, let's imagine we're doing some training for an information security course. And you know how clients often, you start with some general statements, you know, for what you want out of this training. We want to make sure that employees need to be aware of the company's guidelines for information security. We want them to understand and follow the guidelines, right? Simple enough. So once we get in, we talk with the SMEs a little bit more. We can certainly refine the objectives to the list you see on the screen. You know, explain the potential results, describe methods used by the company and employees to safeguard, maybe recognize methods used by hackers to access the information, and finally we want them to be able to describe steps, you know, the employees must take to counteract those attempted hacking. All right, you can imagine you probably have similar courses at your company. So given that, what I want to do now is show you a graphic, and if you have the handout up on your screen side by side, or if you printed a hard copy, this is just page 1 of that handout. So this is a graphic that we like to use to figure out what should be the best delivery method. And it's really based on having some good, you know, it's really based on, like we said, knowing your learning objectives, right? So let me give you a little bit of a tour of the graphic first. So what our goal is here is once we go through the activity here I'm going to show you, our goal is to get in this gray acceptable range, all right? And so the first thing we have is I want to show you up the y-axis here. This is kind of a continuum where you're going to plot your learning objectives from awareness to understanding to skill. And across the x-axis here then, what you see across the bottom are really the different delivery methods. And if you read the language here, it's about the degree of real-time performance and feedback designed into the learning. In other words, you get to practice it and you get some feedback and coaching along the way. All right, so let's take a simple example here. Let's say it was one of those objectives really about, you know, are you aware of the company's guidelines around information security? So if you plot your objective here and slide over into the acceptable range and down, really any of these delivery methods here are going to be great delivery methods to teach that kind of objective. Audio or visual presentations, level 1 self-paced, which is like simple e-learning, maybe a little job shadowing, all right? Now what if on the other hand our objective was to really perform those steps to avoid hacking, all right? You actually have to perform something. That sounds like a skill to me. So if we plot our learning objective here at skill and slide over into this acceptable range and down, then we see the better delivery methods are going to be really kind of advanced web-based training, a level 3 where you can simulate some things, or classroom, or on-the-job coaching and field training. All right? Now you see a couple other colors here. Imagine if we were trying to teach that skill and we came over here and down. Imagine if we were just going to use an audio presentation to teach a skill. What happens then? Oh, probably not effective, all right? You're not going to achieve your objectives. But what about on the other hand, if you just had an awareness level and you came all the way over here and you were going to do classroom training maybe or field coaching, then what? Yep, probably not efficient. So very much an overkill. All right, so that's just a simple graphic, and we find often our clients like to use it with their internal customers because it kind of builds that rationale for why one delivery method is better than another. All right, so let's let you try. We have a couple polls here. So if you look at the first poll here, if the learning objective is recognize why the new ABC system is important, what's the best delivery method? Go ahead and select your answer here and we'll see what folks think. All right, so it looks like Excellent. I would agree. It's just a low-level objective, and most of you have video presentations, so I think that's the best answer. You can't go wrong with the others, but they might be a little more than you need for that objective. All right, we got one more poll question here. Try your hand at it. If the learning objective is repair the ABC equipment on the plant floor, what's the best delivery method? Go ahead and make your choice. All right, excellent. Yeah, so this is probably a skill, right? So if we're going to get to skill, we're going to probably need that field coaching. So I would agree with the 85% of you. All right, thanks for participating with that. All right, it looks like everybody's good for now, so I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
All right, thank you, Lisa. So now we're on the path to select authoring tools based on the delivery method. And as is often the case in a real-world project, you don't necessarily get all of your requirements accurate and complete right up front. So we continue to find out more from the clients as the project proceeds. So we've got Joel, who wants to customize the course interface to match their branding, which is a common requirement. And Denise wants graphics and bulleted text synced with audio narration. So she's thinking about a particular instructional design technique here. And Joel wants to make sure that the user must complete the course in linear order first, but then they could go back and revisit in any order without having to complete everything in order again. And then some requirements that come from the organization. In-house instructional designers need to be able to edit the content later, so they want to make sure that they have the easiest tools to learn. We want to have the learning compatible with most common web browsers. And we want graphics that look professional and audio that will sound professional. On top of that, Joel has decided that learners need to be able to branch past some content, depending on whether they're an individual contributor or a manager of people. So we don't want to waste their time on taking some content that they don't need to take if it's not applicable to their role. And then Denise is thinking ahead, and she wants to make sure that this course could run on tablets in the future, even though right now we only need to use it on computers initially. So what I want to do next is give you some background about categories of authoring tools to help us make the decision about what tools we should pick. So this chart is showing tool categories by capability and complexity. And as you work your way across the top from formatting to authoring to scripting to programming, we're increasing really in both capability and complexity. And the first tool category here, the formatting tools. These are capability and complexity level of 1, and they're really best suited to presenting content that doesn't have any interactivity. And they're designed to be simple enough for anyone to use. So a tool that might fit into this category, for example, would be like Microsoft Word. If we move up a level to level 2, now we're supporting low to medium levels of interactivity without writing any code. And these are designed for experienced instructional designers to use. So we would be able to create interactions without having to have an expert programmer. Some tools that would fall into this category, we're going to talk about more, Captivate and Storyline and Studio and Lectora. If we move up again to level 3, to the scripting level, now we get medium to high levels of interactivity, and these are designed to be used by an experienced programmer. So this might be someone who knows JavaScript, for instance. Then at the very far right, we're looking at the level for an expert programmer, and perhaps the type of person who has a college degree in computer science. These would be tools like Java and Objective-C and C#. So how does this chart help us? What we're really looking to do here is to make sure that we get the right level of capability and complexity depending on what we're trying to develop. And so just like Lisa was talking about efficiency and effectiveness, if we use a tool that's not capable enough, we might not be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And if we pick a tool that's too powerful, we're wasting our time by paying someone too much for what we're trying to accomplish. So this chart focuses on tools that are for e-learning delivered via the browser. And if you would type in the chat if you're using any of these tools. All right, so I'm seeing Captivate and Storyline and Articulate, many of the things I'd expect to see. That's great. So let's look at some of the pros and cons of some of these tools in particular. So Adobe Captivate falls into that level 2 authoring tool level. Again, that means medium levels of interactivity and designed for experienced instructional designers. So one of its strengths is it's great for creating software demonstrations and software simulations. It has a long history of being used for that. One of its weaknesses is that it provides less control over how menus and interactions work than some of the other tools.
And now take a look at this screen. Here's another authoring tool, Articulate Studio. And I mean, I really love this format where in one simple glance of the screen, you know, here again, we can look at the capability. Well, this one's low to medium level of interactivity. From a complexity standpoint, this is really going to work for experienced instructional designers. When we think about the strengths, it's one really, I'm sure many of you, like you said, use this. It's one of the easiest tools to learn. From a weakness standpoint, though, some of the interactivity is limited, you know, especially mostly to content chunking and standard question types. And I'm sure you've experienced some of those strengths and weaknesses when you work with it.
So next, Articulate Storyline, not to be confused with Articulate Studio that we just looked at. This still falls in the authoring level, but it falls in the high end of the authoring level, both in terms of capability and complexity. So this means that it takes a little bit longer to learn, but it also allows for more powerful interactivity. Again, still appropriate for experienced instructional designers without the need of a dedicated programmer, though you might have a few questions for a programmer from time to time. To me, Storyline is really a pleasure to work with from a programming point of view because of the consistency they have and the logic how things work. One of the drawbacks within Storyline is that the way that the next and back buttons work are a little bit different than you might expect. In many of the other tools, if you hit the back button, you're going back to the page you were on before, whereas in Storyline, by default, it looks more like a web browser, which it jumps back to whatever page you were on before, regardless of whether it was the last page in the sequence. Another thing to watch out for in Storyline if you have long courses is that you have less control over how much gets stored in a bookmark than you do in some other tools. So potentially you could run out of space to store your bookmark in the LMS. A little bit less of a concern if you're using SCORM 2004 where you can store 64,000 characters instead of the 4K limit in earlier versions of SCORM.
Hey, Matt, there's somebody that chatted in here and they wanted to add something to this. They said the linear stack of slides in Studio leads to disorganization. Storyline Scenes has been great. You can organize by concept.
I would agree with that statement. Studio assumes basically straight through from beginning to end, and you can branch around, but it doesn't give you a visually easy way to manage what you're doing. The Scenes feature in Storyline makes it much easier to do so. Good comment there. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
Also, I don't really have time to jump in more into Storyline, into the software simulation and demonstrations, but it has also the capability, like Captivate, to produce software simulations and demonstrations, and it's good at that as well. Next one in is Lectora Publisher. So again, it falls at the high end of authoring, so still meant for experienced instructional designers, but the learning curve is a little higher probably than any of the other ones we've talked about so far today. So you get more power for that. Lectora brings in a scripting capability through its actions functionality, which again increases the learning curve. An advantage is easy integration of HTML. So Lectora is the only one of these tools that we've talked about that throughout its entire history was meant to publish to HTML instead of to Flash. So it's always been good at integrating HTML in. One of the drawbacks to Lectora is that it assumes that you're going to build the course shell from scratch. It doesn't provide an interface like the other ones do for an automatic navigation menu. And the process for synchronizing audio is somewhat labor-intensive. So I see a question there about steps to remove the Storyline player. Is there an easier way to do that? So in the player template, it does require a number of color adjustments, pretty much getting everything to black or white to be in the background. I would say it's not a super long task to do that, but it does take a little bit of doing just that you don't have complete control over the color of every element individually. Some of them are connected together where changing the color of one thing changes some other colors at the same time. So that is something to watch out for.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so I thought this would be a good spot for us to stop for an exercise, and if you will go to your handout now, or you can work from what I'm going on from the screen if you just want to do it in your head. What I want you to do is I have along the left side here under the needs all the requirements that we gathered from our Information Security Awareness course from Joel and Denise and the organization. And then I want you to put an X in each column to say whether the tools would be good at fulfilling that requirement or not. So you'll notice you could check more than one in each one of those rows, and it would be fine if you did that if more than one tool can fulfill that. So I'll give you a couple of minutes, and when you have chosen how the tools line up to the requirements, then I want you to think about what authoring tool would you choose based on the cheat sheet that you have created. All right, hopefully you've had enough time to work through there. And what I want to do now is have you put in which authoring tool you chose based on your analysis there. All right, it looks like a fair number of people have had a chance to respond, and seeing by and large storyline as the primary choice with an equal number kind of distributed among some others. So let me show you first how I built the chart here. And so one of the things that I want to point out in looking at this chart is that whether or not a tool is good at meeting that requirement or not is somewhat subjective. So it's not black and white like, yes, this is definitely the right place to put the X's or it isn't. But the most important thing to take away from this is when you're picking the right tool for the job, the right tool is dependent upon the requirements for that particular need. And so you want to build something like this to kind of add up all the requirements and add up all the skills of each tool for the requirement, and then make your choice about which is the best tool. So in this case, based on the way I have it ranked, I would probably choose Articulate Studio because I've got one more X there than I do in the other ones, basically in the one row that says we want the easiest possible tool for instructional designers to use. I would argue Articulate Studio is going to be easier to use than any of the other tools. It doesn't surprise me, though, that folks would choose Articulate Storyline as well because that tool is still fairly easy to use, and it does bring quite a bit of capability that you don't get in Studio. So I guess in summary, I choose Articulate Studio based on this requirement, but others are really close, and so I couldn't argue too hard that you wouldn't be right with saying Storyline. All right. So Lisa, unless there's any more questions here, I'll turn it back over to you.
Very good. Well, thank you. I don't know about you guys, but every time I listen to Matt, I learn something new. So what we're trying to do now is we're ready to move from our objectives and delivery methods and tools onto our interactions. In other words, we want to choose the practice interactions that are going to serve those objectives, right, and also be feasible given the delivery method and authoring tools that we've selected. So to do this, I love to use a taxonomy by Stephen Yellen, and he's got this described really well in his book, Powerful Principles of Instruction. And the taxonomy here looks at types of learning. So you see the 4 types of learning on the screen. So we have fact, concept, principle, and skill. And the idea here is if you can determine what type of learning you're trying to teach, then you can choose the practice interaction to match that. I'd be curious in the chat if you would chime in, have you used a taxonomy like this? Yes or no? And if you have used something like this but different, I'd love to have you share in the chat what that taxonomy is. Go ahead and just take a minute to share that. Haven't seen this before, somebody comments. Somebody else thinks about knowledge, skill, and attitude. Okay. That's kind of along that same line as awareness, understanding, skill that we talked about. Okay. Someone says no, haven't used something like that before. Well, good. Thank you. I think that's not uncommon. So what we're going to do now is go through each of those types of learning, and for each, I want to share with you the definition, how to present it, how to demonstrate, or how the learner can demonstrate their learning, and how to reinforce that with either practice or testing. So here we are starting with fact, and the definition is just a description or definition of a person, place, thing, event, behavior, or process that has existed or occurred or does exist or occur. So you have a couple simple examples here, right? Washington crossed the Delaware on December 25th, or a water molecule contains 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. All right? Straightforward facts. What's the best way to present these? Well, straightforward presentation. Nice if you can use some media, graphics, animation, audio, video, because that can illustrate it or make it come alive certainly a bit better. What's the best way for the learner to demonstrate their learner or their learning? Is just to have them state the fact without prompts. And as far as practice and testing, you can have the learner recall the fact by answering any type of standard question interaction, multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank matching. The questions can be text-based or use other media. And certainly you want to look for ways to increase the challenge and engagement levels. For example, the learner could drag and drop the correct type and number of atoms under the water molecule. In other words, put the practice right in the context of how they're using it. Here's a couple other examples. You could do a text entry. For example, if you were trying to type in the names of 5 types of rooms in a house, that's a fact. Or you could do a multiple response where you were trying to select names of a room in a house from a list of distractors, which includes both room names and items that are not room names. All right? So just a couple, just simple way to look at defining and practicing and some examples of fact. So now we have the same construct for concept, right? Okay, so a definition is an abstract or generic idea generalized from particular instances or characteristics that's been defined and named. So a couple examples here. If you wanted to look at good customer service by store associates, you might look at the behaviors. Or to say, well, insects are small invertebrate animals having 6 legs and a body of 3 parts. All right, those are some good definitions. Well, how would you present a concept? You'd simply define the concept, and then the key here is to follow it with lots of examples so you're making the concept clear. And again, certainly the media can help kind of move you from the abstract to something more concrete. For the learners to demonstrate their learning, they can identify a previously unobserved example and explain the reason he or she could recognize it. And finally, for that practice and testing, have the learner define the concept and then provide an example or recognize an example of the concept and explain why. So again, you can use standard question interactions. You can enhance it with the media as it makes sense. And certainly we all know we love it when we can do a scenario or a story as the basis for that activity and test question. Here's a couple of actual interactions related to concept. What about a multiple choice where you had people select the pictures of household items that belong in the kitchen? You could also do a drag and drop where you're dragging the pictures of the household items to the picture of the room they belong in, right? That's pretty easy to see. So that's concept. Our next type of learning then is principle, all right? So what's the best way to practice if you're trying to teach a principle? So what's our definition? Why don't you go ahead and read this screen here. All right, so if that's the definition, how do we want to present it? Well, we can explain it, including the underlying facts that prove it to be true as appropriate. Again, you can illustrate with examples or non-examples, and stories are great when possible. For the learner to show that they've learned it, they can apply the principle to a new situation or conditions, and that application can take such forms as explaining, predicting, inferring cause, controlling, or troubleshooting. And to practice that or test that, given a situation and a set of conditions or a problem, have the learner do one of the following. They can either recognize the principle it illustrates, can apply the principle to predict the outcome or solve the problem, and certainly just base the practice activity or test questions on examples, scenarios, stories that illustrate that situation or the problem or the conditions. And just a nice interaction for this would certainly just be a text entry or show pictures of 2 clean rooms and 1 messy room. I'm sure none of you have seen a messy room, huh? So ask the learner to explain why the one room is messy based on the contents of the room. And after the learner submits the answer, you can show the correct answer, and then they just do a self-comparison. So that's principle. Our last type of learning then is skill. So our definition here is a series of steps to perform an action or task to achieve the result. Examples could be, right, in the spreadsheet cell, set up a formula that calculates the product of 2 other cells. Perhaps write a sentence containing a subject, a verb, an object, or maybe find the square root of a number. If you notice the note on the screen here, we talk about this a lot. Only certain skills can truly be taught with e-learning. And those that are the ones where you're really, it can be demonstrated and performed using a computer. In other words, you're simulating the task in the e-learning. All right, so how do you present that? Well, you present, explain, and demonstrate the steps, and again, use appropriate media. You can always include a description or illustration of the expected end result, right? In other words, what does good look like? What does success look like? How do I know when I've got it? Show them a picture of that. For the learner, they actually have to demonstrate the thing, right? You have to do the skill to show that you've learned it. Some practice and testing ideas, perhaps use a 2-phase approach. First, guided practice, where the learner is prompted through the task steps and receives corrective feedback along the way. And then certainly he or she needs to perform on her own. Learner performs the task to achieve a result. Correct or incorrect feedback is provided at the end. And you can use standard question interactions or computer simulations for these. And again, certainly enhance it with scenarios. Couple ideas or real examples here for skill is give the learner the task and see if he can perform it while a coach is watching. Even better if the coach has some kind of observation checklist. And then give the learner a simulation of the task that can be graded by the computer. So if you're using online or e-learning, actually simulate it. This could be a software simulation or action maze or some kind of decision-making simulation. So let's try this. This is exercise 3 on page 3 in your handout. So what we have here on the left is the learning objective, what we want the learner to be able to do. And then we want you to first think about, is it a fact, is it a concept, a principle, or a skill? And then what's the best interaction type? So if we look at the first one together, explain why information is classified. All right, well, that's a principle. How can we teach a principle? Well, we could have the learner type in the answer and compare it to what the expert says. What about the next one? Let's do this one together too. If it's, recall the importance of protecting passwords. So I'd say that's a fact, and a nice interaction type there would just be a multiple choice question. We've got one more where we've kind of shared the answer we can look at together is if you're trying to get the learner to identify the difference between a strong password and a weak password, right? That's kind of a concept. Pick the examples and non-examples. So the interaction type is exactly that. Show a series of strong or weak passwords and then the learner either chooses if each is strong or weak. So why don't you take a minute on your own and do those last 3 rows there, and then we'll talk about them. All right, we're going to go ahead and put up what I had as some possible answers. So our 4th row there, describe what to do if your laptop is stolen. So I would say that's a fact, and you can just show the statement of what should be done with several spots blank where the user needs to fill in the missing words. So that's one possible way to do that. There's certainly several. The next row then, what if your objectives, it says, recognize spam messages. I would say that's a concept. So you could show a list of email subjects on a graphic of an email inbox and then have the learners select all of the ones that are spam. So a select all multiple choice type question might work well for that one. And finally, that last row then, we're looking at trying to perform the steps for identified spam using a computer simulation. So there I would say that's a skill, and so a possible interaction there is to do a software simulation where the user actually performs the steps or send a real test message. So as you do that exercise, as you're thinking about the interaction type, did that cause you to rethink the authoring tool a little bit is sometimes what happens. It's like, I'd really, now that I think about this, I really want to use this authoring tool instead of the one I selected. It's probably maybe easier to use that tool is what you might be thinking.
So Lisa, I wanted to jump in here and talk about one example of how an interaction was done about recognizing spam messages from one of our clients. And they were lucky to have the opportunity to, following up with their e-learning, have a situation where they could send out fake phishing messages, fake spam messages to their employees, and then be able to track whether people were opening them or not, which would allow them to have it be practiced really on the job and give feedback if they were doing it wrong, and also to see what extent people were picking up the learning that they shouldn't be clicking into those spam messages. So that was a really cool example.
I love that. Yeah, that's a whole lot more fun than a multiple choice or true false. Excellent. All right, that is the end of our formal presentation, and I'll turn it back over to Tom to wrap things up.
All right, well, thank you, Matt and Lisa, and I think you would probably agree that, we deliver on what we say. We said we were a performance-first company, and what you had today was some good training and some great tools, all of which you will be able to have access to and refer to as you motor on and design and develop your own instruction. We want to thank all of you who joined us today. As you can see, our contact information is on the screen, and we continue to invite you to reach out to us, with questions or thoughts or any further comments. And Matt and Lisa are both on Twitter, and all the ILG handles are listed on the screen here, so we encourage you to follow up and follow us. We also have a LinkedIn group, Friends of Innovative Learning Group, and we encourage you to join and post discussion items if you haven't already. We want to thank you, and we hope to see you on the next one. Take care. Have a good day.